Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Kari Kammel, Director of ACAP Center, and our esteemed panel.
Thank you to Concordia and our distinguished panelists for joining us today. I'm very excited to introduce a dynamic group of women who share the stage with me today from the public-private sectors, as well as myself in academia. So to start on my far right, Linda Solano, who is an expert on gender and corruption. Heather Fischer, Senior Advisor for Human Rights Crimes at Thomson Reuters Special Services. And Cecilia Perez, who is the Security Advisor to the President for the Republic of Paraguay. Thank you, ladies, for joining me up here today. So we hope to have an honest conversation with you all in this last panel of the program. We're going to be discussing the role of women in national security based on our experiences and hope to leave you with some takeaways from this session. So Cecilia, I'd like to start with you. What is it like being a woman in national security?
Oh, in my case, I am the first advisor of national security for the president, but most difficult for me was being Minister of Justice. I have this prison emergency declared by security problems, serious security problems, and then added the pandemic that caused a lot of serious problems in prisons in the world. So always is this question, are you afraid of this? And I think the men are afraid too, but they didn't question that. We do. So being a woman in a leadership position, owned by men, planned for men, it has these difficulties, but it's not to be afraid to paralyze or not forward.
Great, thank you. Heather, turning to you, how can we work around issues of tokenism to ensure that women are not a lone voice or suppressed in the national security conversations?
Great question. And first, it's just so great to be back at Concordia. I want to thank Matt and the whole team for putting us together, because we actually had a conversation earlier today where I think we were more like a support group than a panel discussion. And I actually prepared substantive remarks about my work in national security, and then I heard, actually, it'd be great if you could share some more stories. So we have war stories to share, but then also some key advice. And so to your question, though, Kari, in my view, tokenism is hugely detrimental, and here's why. Because it is a myth that there's only one seat at the table for a woman leader. And this scarcity mentality actually causes significant issue between colleagues that are women leaders. And in my view, we have to do everything we can to resist that king of the hill mentality, to push every woman down because they might somehow outseat you in the future. And I call it mean girl behavior, to be honest with you. And I know maybe that doesn't resonate with everybody here, but for the Americans it should. Because both in my time at think tanks, academic institutions, NGOs, and even working in the White House as a White House senior official, I saw a lot of this. And I think it was because we were tokenized. And so I'm hoping that collectively we can agree to resist that and to recognize that there's more than one seat at the table, and that we shouldn't be tokenized as women leaders. And I think we can do that. I think we're actually getting there. So,
Great.
Not sure if anybody else has anything to add to that, but that's been my experience.
Okay. Thank you for that. And we did have a very lively conversation ahead of time talking about our experiences around that.
Well, you know, Secretary Albright said it best, I think, when she said, there's a special place for women who don't support other women.
Thank you for that. Turning to Linda, can you talk about women's contribution to national security and your work in organized crime and corruption?
Thank you, Kari. I'm going to start probably from this tokenism point, because sometimes having a woman, it's considered, you know, a check, but that means access to certain positions or being able to be part of decision making. But that doesn't mean that women's perspective or needs in general, because it is a big diversity. Of course, when we talk about women issues, it's not just one type of woman. We imagine one woman, but it's not like that. You know, the diversity is immense. So it's not just about having a woman in certain position, it's about quality of the representation. So when we talk about tokenism, it's like access. And we need that. We need access. We need to get there. But when we are there, we need quality representation, quality of voice, quality of being listened to. And going to why we need these voices in national security, probably we can address that from 2 points of view. One is that we live in a world that is designed considering men, a main perspective and needs as the neutral way of thinking things. If I ask you now, like, who is a genius for you? I think the majority of people will think about, I don't know, Albert Einstein, you know, a man will come to mind. So, and this is applicable for so many different aspects of life that we don't see. For example, when in a city we're planning the transportation routes, we think about the way men usually transport from point A, house, to point B, work. But this doesn't work the same way for the majority of women, because the majority of women have to go to the dentist, have to take the kids to the dentist, they have to go pick up laundry, they have to go for their groceries. So their transportation system is kind of chaotic, but it's not designed that way. So they need to go by walking, they need to go to take so many different buses. So the city, the way it is planned itself, it doesn't take into consideration the needs of more than the 50% of the population. And this applies also to national security. What women see, for example, working on the gender perspective of witness protection, what women see, what they denounce, what is the type of what is the type of punishment women receive when they denounce things for witness protection programs is completely different. So taking into consideration women's perspective in this topic is something about effectiveness and efficiency, because you are not considering a big part of the problem. For example, in criminal organizations, women represent a very relevant part, but we are just starting to wonder what is the role of women in criminal organizations, and mainly, for example, regarding human trafficking and some others. But this whole participation of women in organized crime and this type of crimes is just starting being part of the conversation. And this is an advantage that organizations have, because they use women for different reasons, or they lead things, and we don't know that. So it is part of understanding the whole thing.
Great, thank you for that. And we had discussed a lot of the issues that women face in national security, but in a variety of contexts before this session. But we also wanted to talk about some positives and some wins and some examples where we feel there were some really great things that were done to empower women and deal with the gender gap that was talked about in prior sessions of this conference. So I'm going to open it up to the panel for some positive experiences that you all have seen, or also some best practices or ways that might be able to help others, change where they work.
Well, I come from a long line of amazing women. I know Paula's around here somewhere, and Charity Wallace, and they really set the path. Ambassador Dabrowski being an undersecretary, but really bringing together the women's peace and security community, where there's an intersection between national security and human rights and empowering women leaders is really important. So I have big shoes to fill in that respect. But I think that it's an interesting question, because Where I've seen this well is actually when I transitioned from the White House and I was looking for my next opportunity in the private sector. Actually, some of it went well and some of it didn't. If any of you have gone through a recruitment process, you know it's sort of like a 6 month to 1 year, I call it just like a speed dating opportunity almost, where you know, the C-suite is telling you all the wonderful things and attributions about their company, and I'm sure they're true, but then you talk to the recruiter, right? And then it's sort of like dealing with that used car salesman. And so for me, I was talking to a couple of different companies, and 2 of them offered me very low offers, great titles. And I said, okay, I'm just curious. For the other men that have come to your organization that also were a White House czar, is this what their salary and benefits package looked like? Because if it is, then great, I'm satisfied. But if the answer to that is no, then I'd like you to take another look. And it was funny because, in fact, very quickly they said, oh, we'll have to get back to you. And we don't know if we keep those types of records. And I said, you know what's so funny? I actually happen to know a couple of others are, so I could just reach out to them and see. But with Thomson Reuters, it wasn't that way at all. In fact, they said, we're putting you on the executive leadership team, here's your salary. And it was so refreshing because I didn't have to battle for what I knew I should be compensated for. So that was really positive for me.
That's a great example. Thank you.
I think the mentoring can be a really important opportunity for a young woman who see us like superwoman. I can do it, you can do it, but I won't do it. So it's very important to be, we say in Spanish, sororidad, so be like, I made this way for you, must not be so harder for you, and I can be here for you. That's so important because I think in all Latin America, it's very hard to get this leadership position for women, and we are not Wonder Woman, Superwoman. We are normal, and that young woman, normal, can be there here too.
Great, thank you for that, Cecilia. Ana Linda.
Colombia have the particularity that you have women in decision-making and power positions. You have, I don't know, Bogota's mayor is woman, LGBTQ community. You have so many prosecutors, friends of mine, custom people who have given even sometimes their life, but most of the time they have received attacks all the time. I'm very proud of my women friends in this type of position, and I think in Colombia you see a lot of women in this type of topics and in this type of discussions, but it's not in equal conditions, and it doesn't cost to us the same. It's like we have an extra tax to demonstrate that you are good enough and that what you have to say is relevant in context. And yeah, I see it as a tax. Sometimes even, you know, I work in gender and corruption. Sometimes, for example, even to pay some bribery thing or something like that, you have an extra sexual favor that you have to pay. So that extra thing tells us that we are not in equal conditions in society. Even though you have so many brave women, as here you can see as an example. So I think that in order to get there, you need to have political will. And when I say political will, is that the head of the government, the private company, the house, hold, that you want to do that. You want to give to your 2 children, your ministries, your whatever the organization you're running, equal conditions. And that starts in accessing to it, and there are so many examples. The symphony, I think it was Chicago or New York, I don't know, that they start doing like these blind auditions, and then they start having more female musicians, because before that, when they saw the auditions, they thought as a natural thing that men were genuinely better than women in general. With the blind auditions, they start having, for some reason, more women musicians. So there is something in our societies, I don't know what it is, but it's sometimes more difficult for us to access. And in order to revert that, you need will, and decisive will. And it's constant, and it's permanent to have that in your mind, to open your mind. Once you see that biases, you can't stop seeing. There are like lenses that change your vision of things, but you have to get there as a whole, because it is a cultural thing in our societies. And as you were saying, it's not something a man thing, it's the way we construct our society. So we have to deconstruct many things in order to build them again with more perspectives included, not just women perspective, but in so many diversity perspectives.
Thank you for that. And building on what all of you have said, you know, being an academic, we study very much the bias that exists. And you're very right, it exists both from men and women, what that looks like. But then how do we change that? How do we go about, you know, doing some of the things we've talked about? What are some of those positive steps that we can all take, regardless of what sector we're in, whether we're in the public, private sector, whether we're in academia, and how can we change that? How can we make it a little bit different? So for example, in some of my past work in rule of law, we took a lot of mentorship programs and actually taught people how to do them, because we found that, as you mentioned, there were very high-ranking women in positions, but they had never been through a mentorship program. They were not mentored. They maybe fought their way up or encountered many barriers. So sometimes that has to go, you know, we can look at education as a tool to do that as well. So let me ask you all of you another question, because we have a few minutes here. What unique contributions can women make to the national security dialogue? I know we didn't talk about that one ahead of time, but just wanted to know what you all think about that. What unique contributions within your experience and your backgrounds?
Well, I think for me, I've historically worked on the issue of human trafficking, and that's expanded to more of a human rights portfolio. But I think in the national security space, when I first started in this work, no one was working on that. There was sort of a view that that was for the NGOs to take care of and the international organizations, and it was, you know, in the United States we'd say do-gooders work. But what I recognize is that traffickers are a part of transnational organized crime. And when I started talking to the intelligence community and the folks at DoD, they'd say, Heather, we see this in our threat environment, but it's not in our mission set. And so I've worked really hard to integrate that. When we pushed out the US government national strategy on human trafficking, it made sure that every agency understood this is a national security issue. It undermines our economy because we cannot compete with countries who use forced labor, slave labor. And that this is an existential threat, because from an international relations perspective, it didn't rise to that occasion. But when I was talking to Charity, for example, yesterday, I think women see all of this work integrated. It's really hard for me to silo human trafficking from national security and from women's economic empowerment and access to credit and capital and workforce development. I think we see it kind of as all of the above, and so I think that's sort of unique.
Great, thank you for that.
Very interesting point. Numbers don't lie. Peace agreements that have women mediators have more possibilities to success for longer time, for example. So resilience processes are very important to have women perspective. And women are account in conflicts for most of the victims, for example. In Colombia, 4 million victims are women. So being part of reconstruction of society, reconstruction of economy, reconstruction of territory, that's huge. And UN Women have measured that, and the amount of success it's 35% sometimes. But the number, for example, of agreements in where women participate or lead is less than 20%. So it doesn't make sense that you are more successful if you have women in your groups, but you don't have that much. And as Heather was saying, for example, in Colombia, in order to reconstruct territory where there have been conflict, where there have been illicit economies, because these are, as we were saying yesterday, illicit ecosystem. It is to understand that you have to economically empower women, give access to financial services, because they are head of many of these households, and women and young people. These are the things that you have to target in order to come through these economic dynamics. And I think this is a very relevant aspect, to seeing a conflict, organized crime, and this type of illicit economies as an opportunity to resiliate and to reconstruct many of our problems, at least in our region, in Latin America, and some others.
Great, thank you.
I think Heather and Ana Linda said so much, but I think that in all of this process of rebuild everything, we are more often doing this, and it's more complete. Like in case of organized crime, drug dealers, the mother single with a lot of children and very poor, it's part of the system, and everybody see, but nobody's working on that. And when we came and see why are you working on that? Yes, I see, but it's always there. So it's more complete, because it's like men see the tree and we see the forest.
Thank you for that, Cecilia. So we have a few minutes left, and I wanted to wrap up with a final question for maybe some action, a takeaway for those of you in the audience. So I'll open up to the panel. What is an action step that people can take to support women in national security?
For me, understanding, it's always the first step, characterizing, understanding the dimension of the situation of the problem. So I think that having a gender mainstreaming plan gives you the idea of what you need, because every context is unique. So being serious with the gender mainstreaming part, each of the different steps you have to achieve for that, it's like the basic point, the basic starting point. But for that, I'll have to come to my first idea in the discussion, and that's political will. I mean, you do that with your programs and your initiatives when you understand that you have to have these different perspectives for efficiency, effectiveness, whatever is the reason that you want to do it. But that's the starting point for me. Coming from a political will, trying to understand how it presents in your organization, for example, or in a national security topic. And from that, there are many manuals. There are so many recipes already that you have in that. But for me, that will be the starting point, understanding what you have to do, the thread, the dimension of the problem, the situation, how it presents in your organization, in your government, in the national security topic, and starting from that. Because we can say you can mentor, you can all that, but without fully understanding what you're dealing with, it's very difficult to start. So I'll go from there.
Great.
I think that's exactly right. The way I sort of look at this is I'm grateful to men who show up to Women in Leadership events and celebrate Women's History Month with us. But for me, it would just be great to have your support in the mundane and in the boardroom and everything in between. Because in those moments where we're on Teams meetings and in the conference room and we don't have allies showing up for us, all of that is negated. All the pomp and circumstance of women's events that I've been to at the State Department and things like that, when I haven't had my colleagues who have had my back in the day-to-day, I think that is the most challenging thing. And thankfully, when I was in the executive office of the president, I worked very closely with the National Security Advisor. And from day one, he said, I care about your issue. You have my full support. And I'm going to send a signal to the rest of my staff about how much I care about this by designating 2 senior directors to work with you. And I so appreciated it. It was such a small thing. And so I think, sort of my advice is, yes, appoint us to your boards. Yes, include us in executive leadership teams, but also just showing up for us in the mundane things is where it really counts. So I think I'm just really hopeful we'll continue to have this discussion, because I think we could spend a whole week on the topic. But to kind of sum it all up, I think that's really my key piece of advice.
Great, thank you.
And I
Any
think
closing words?
that we women, we are here, we have a duty with young women who are working came here. So we have to work seriously about that.
Great, thank you. So to Cecilia, Heather, and Linda, thank you so much. It was an honor to be on this panel with you. And thank you again to Concordia and to the audience today.